Welcome everyone. This is our 13th and final episode of IEC Thermo's Wednesday webinar summer series. My name is Jen Paffenroth. I'm the business support manager here at IEC Thermo. So glad you all can join us today. We have three panelists on our Show Me the Money webinar: Rados from PanXChange, Michael Glade with Sweetleaf Capital, and Tim Broderick with IEC Thermo. As always, we will have time to answer your questions at the end of today's webinar. So if you think of a question at any point, you can write it in the Q&A section at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and these guys will get it answered for you. So Alex, Michael, and Tim are all industry experts with lots of expertise in their specific areas, but with a topic like this where people's situations can be so different from one business to the next, just always remember to do your own due diligence or reach out to Alex, Michael, or Tim for specific details to your business plan. And then we also have a poll, which we will be launching shortly. And it's just a few short questions so we can get to know you guys better, just to see who's joining us from what parts of the industry, things like that. So we'll launch that in just a moment. But first, let's do some more official introductions. And let me get on to the next slide. So let's start off with Tim. We'll start with Tim, and tell us about what your company does, what is your role, and what services do you offer your customers?
Sure, thanks Jen. Welcome everyone. I'm Tim Broderick and I represent IEC Thermo. We manufacture best-in-class hemp dryers, but we do more than that. We really help folks make informed decisions prior to making that purchase. So we position ourselves as good stewards in a pretty dynamic and robust industry, an industry I think that's fraught with mis and disinformation, and hence the real value of being that good steward. My role is business development and also complemented by marketing, where we try to develop marketing messages based on not only our customers' needs, but also our customers' needs. That could be robust COAs, which are very valuable in documenting what we're trying to achieve. I'm fortunate, as Jen knows, to be surrounded by some pretty effective team members, from chemical engineers to farmers to the technology dudes, which I'm giving a shout out to today, to recreation cannabis experts, construction engineers, and business development folks. So a pretty broad range of folks that try to bring in some perspectives that help round out the decisions that we're trying to help our customers make for the long term. So we just don't dry hemp. We help understand and folks understand how to stabilize that whole plant. And we do that just not by our dryers, Jen and company, but also bringing in that integrated model, that vertical integration of strategic partners advising through that truly linear experience. So in a nutshell, that's who we are. That's what my role is, Jen and company, and some of the services that we offer.
Great, thanks, Tim. Let's go to Michael next, and then Alex will end with you for this one.
Thank you, Jen. My name is Mike Glade. I'm with Sweetleaf Capital here in Denver, Colorado. Our company provides equipment financing specifically within the cannabis space. So we finance marijuana and hemp projects, equipment specifically. My role is really customer relations. I'm an engineer by training with operations and maintenance background for equipment. So I also do some technical and business diligence when we work with yourself, the customer. We really offer, basically loans, leases, salebacks, and some gap financing around PO financing for those of you that are established or when you get established. So it's a pretty simple model. It's very focused on equipment financing and supporting the customers within the cannabis space, which we'll talk a little bit later why that can be difficult to secure financing.
Perfect, thanks, Michael. Alex, how about you?
Hey, yeah, no problem. So I previously, before joining PanXChange, worked in fertilizer trade for almost 6 years, a little short of 6 years, buying and selling futures contracts, and then also physical goods, physical commodities, whether that be internationally in containers or in domestically here in kind of more distribution type options. I was really excited to join the hemp team here at PanXChange just because they had been around. PanXChange was formed 9 years ago by our CEO, Julie Lerner. She She was a Cargill trader, similar to the role I was kind of working at, and she wanted to make a system and a platform that could kind of bring buyers and sellers in these new and nascent markets, all these little niche and weird markets that, everyone, when they think commodity trading, they think of, oil or gold or, things like that. But there are a lot of commodities that, that aren't quite regulated yet that you don't have a future on. So in the hemp space specifically, PanXChange, we're the leading benchmark or index provider. We have 9 different regional indexes right now for different products along the line, basically biomass through isolate. So anything in between those two on the spectrum. And then the second thing we do, which kind of feeds into the first thing, is to have a trading platform. And a lot of that data from a trading platform then is transcribed into those index prices. So hopefully where we're going is so then, your average farmer can be able to hedge the crop that he's got in the ground and buy and sell, futures contracts, and really make this a true commodity, as the Chicago folks would call it.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. Again, so glad you guys can all be here. So now we actually just want to take a moment to get to know all of our attendees. We have 5 short questions and a poll. So just if you could take a moment to answer those. How are you involved in the hemp industry? How long have you been in the industry? Where are you located? And a few other questions. So just take a moment. We'll give you a few moments now, and that helps us to know how to steer the conversation as well today. All right, looks like we have 2 people joining us from the West Coast so far. Good, so I'll leave that up. We will move on here, but just finish that up at your convenience. All right, so let's talk about getting into the industry. So Tim, why get into the industry? Talk about what are the critical success factors in achieving measurable outcomes, and what are the realities of entering the hemp industry?
Sure. Why get into the industry? I answer and say, why not? And so I'm a little bit of an optimistic and have a bullish perspective, but when I look at the actual why get into the industry, I think we still have a defined and documented need based upon a broad range of utilization on the more, what I would say, consumer-based products, food additives, medical and therapeutic modalities that expand, or I guess represent, a cross-section of folks from your baby boomers to Gen X, Y, and Z to the millennials in terms of a use case. So I think you have a broad audience that utilizes these consumer-based brands, and that it's making, I think, the industry diversified from the consumer-based perspective. The other thing is that I think we've all learned a great deal, a lot of pain points, right, from the plant, knowing more about the plant, how to process that plant predictably or with more predictability than we did in 2018 and 2019. So some of those pain points has now become key learning. So you have a defined need, you have key learnings that hopefully we won't collectively experience again. The other thing that is a reality is that we experience dynamic and evolutionary steps to an ecosystem of overstated and undocumented possibilities. And to that end, becoming more granular with some details is going to be really helpful for all of us. And that kind of tips the point to the critical success factors. And I think fundamentally it's about sustainability. And that really the bedrock of that is kind of what Mike and Alex speak to in terms of financial stability. And that's also complemented by kind of that vertical integration, not doing it all yourself, but having that vertical integration with partners that could be in a co-op format. The other component that we talk about quite a bit about at IEC Thermo is kind of the how. My sense is that the data is the key and the foundation to not only my optimism, but also for the long-term sustainability of the industry. And data related to, do we have better data and metrics on drying, processing, classifying, extracting, and testing, just to name a few? I believe we have a lot more data points to go on, and we'll build that over time. I think the financial data that Alex is going to speak to relative to resources and some of those inputs on making decisions, maybe even a little bit more proactively with regards to planting. The other thing is, the data and the science as it relates to testing and the COAs, and working with partners like Ionization Labs that has really robust testing, reproducible results at a decentralized level, which is very helpful, to the genetics component, right? With entities like New West Genetics that's coming to market with much better and predictable technology as it relates to that genetics and planting in the ground. So I think the realities are those, but also it comes down to, controlling the controllable, and that's on ours. That's on all of our shoulders. So I think the evolution has gone from like quicksand to more maybe like not firm cement, but actually setting up nicely in terms of more predictability in the future. Still think we'll be moving from fragmentation to more centralized processing centers, Jen and company, as 2019 and 2020 come into fruition. But the reality is, we're looking at regulation and guidance. And I still think those will be ongoing. But I think really the future is in our hands. If we are good stewards collectively and as an industry, I think we'll achieve better outcomes and results for the long term.
Great.
Yeah,
Thanks,
Tim,
Tim.
you mentioned regional stuff there, and that's funny you mentioned that because when you really start sharpening your pencils and you look at the prices of, let's say, biomass as it is right now, especially this is way more of a thing in the herd market where prices we're talking per ton here, and there's only so many tons you can fit on a truck. Viability wise, you only really need to be you have to be so many miles away from a processing facility. Otherwise, you're paying, an arm and a leg. Pretty much, you could be paying, 5-6x what the actual value of the product is just to move it. And that's never going to make sense for anybody. And you're kind of digging your own grave there a little bit.
Yeah, one thing we experienced too, Alex, with regards to that transportation component, whether it's Trinity Logistics or the 357 company, they've dialed in pretty well in terms of tightening that supply chain in terms of having more locations and literally ports of transportation and pickup. That is kind of making that cross-country type of experience less problematic. It's definitely something that's manageable, but it's something that we've seen more robust players in the marketplace coming that have good credibility and definition of ROI.
Yeah, I would. My one caveat, if you are watching this and this is your first year working in the industry, don't hire just any trucking company to do this. You really need to go with a Hemp-specific trucking company that knows exactly what they're doing, what kind of paperwork they need to get into, and you don't want to deal with that whole kerfuffle with law enforcement, trying to figure out what's what.
Right. Don't go cheap.
Yeah. Well, in the spirit of that, getting into the industry, what I'm learning, I talked to a laboratory supplier today, and expertise and experience does matter, just like it does in all of business. Yeah. And they're setting up a testing lab within the cannabis space, and one of the labs was just hiring undergrads to save money. And I can tell you that undergrads may be sharp, but they lack some of the experience necessary to work with some of the either new methods or developing methods. So experience does matter. Something else that we recommend, you think that we are just trying to get money out as quickly as we can, but we're not. We feel like we partner with a customer. And sometimes we'll often say crawl, walk, run, which is an overused statement, but it still can be true. When all your friends or peers may be saying it's easy money, it may be an opportunity as you get into the industry to consider, crawling, walking, and then running. Kind of in line with the spirit of this slide.
Yeah, I mean, on a broader stroke, I think a lot of the sexy money has felt the burn of the prices as they were a year ago from now. If you're looking at a PanXChange report from July and see what the prices are, and you see what this upcoming month's what I'm going to write for that is night and day. So the sexy money's definitely started to kind of go away, and like they say in oil or any other commodity, low prices is the best cure for low prices, because you get the guys out of there and you get the long-term players to stay.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, great point, you guys. All right, we can move on to the next slide here.
Cool.
So showing you the money, why should I secure financing? What can I finance? What are the barriers to getting financing in an emerging industry. And then can you give me an idea about the types of financing, how much I can get, and any general terms? Mike, do you want to start off with this slide?
Sure. Why should I start financing? One thing, again, you have to look at your own specific challenges and where you're at and your own experiences, but really managing your own working capital can be a challenge, and making sure that you retain that working capital. As I noted before, we do offer salebacks, and I'll bring it up again in this slide, but salebacks occur because people have struggled and they've spent most of their working capital, and then they find out that there are additional expenses they're not prepared for. Also, there can be some opportunities if you talk to your own accountant, which I always recommend, whether you can write off anything, whether it's a lease or a loan. So those are a couple of the reasons to secure financing, but managing your spend and your account payables is very important. As far as what you can finance, like I said before, we focused on equipment. We partner with IEC, so obviously we hope that we can help you and finance some IEC equipment. But we also finance equipment from the field, packaging equipment, extraction equipment, laboratory equipment, whether it's in a formal lab, testing lab, or whether it's in a larger operation. So we're pretty diverse when it comes to what we will finance. As far as the barriers to getting into an emerging industry, right now COVID is creating some challenges as we look at the books and we talk to some of our customers. Some things have slowed down. So that can be one challenge that we're experiencing right now. Marijuana and cannabis as a whole, with hemp and marijuana, has been a bit risky. There aren't a lot of lenders in the space because the cost of capital to get into it's high, and the defaults, quite frankly, are higher than traditional lending. So I don't know, I could pause there and see if other members before I go on to the fourth one, if there's anything that anyone else wants to add on the team here.
You covered it pretty well, Mike.
I think a big one that we've seen, just personally, I've seen anecdotally, is, and this ties more into insurance, but it also ties into financing, is a lot of these guys that, let's say I'm a farmer and I don't, have this plethora of other crops, and hemp is going to be basically my only crop. It's not like a supplement crop or anything like that. A lot of guys have begun to ask for, do you have it pre-sold or do you have a pre-contract? And that's, for on the insurance side of things, you have to have it pre-sold, or at least have some sort of documentation saying that someone's going to buy it from you or someone's going to take it from you in a tolling split type manner in order to secure any of that. And that's really hard to find in this industry, especially with such an oversupply in the market right now. And then, coupled that with, who knows if the crop's going to go hot. And now I just signed a contract with, farmer A, and farmer B over here now has product for me. So any of these processors or guys that are kind of playing in the spot market, they're going to just wait and see. It's totally a buyer's market. They can just kind of keep their cards against their chest and wait and see how the rest of the table folds.
Oh, great points, Alex. And then an idea about the types of financing, as I mentioned, we do loans, leases, salebacks, and some PO gap financing. The typical ranges for what we finance are $150,000 to $4 million. That can be for one piece of equipment or multiple pieces of equipment, even from different vendors. So it's something we work with you on. As far as the general terms, once we get the quotes, we'll provide a term sheet so they're clear. So sometimes I like to talk quickly, but I will give you a term sheet and provide a term sheet. And it really, our typical terms are 12 to 36 month type terms, 30 to 50% down. Again, the higher end is because we do fund startups, and startups require a higher down payment. We have a standard loan fee. And then, again, when we get the term sheet, I will talk to you about your business, get a better feel for where you're at, and understand what you may look like from having personal guarantors and things of that nature. And that's how I really structure the term sheet. Keep in mind that I'm the voice of the customer in front of the credit committee. So that's why I spend a lot of time getting to know the customer and making sure that I can tell their story and your story to our credit committee to get financing secured as quickly as possible.
Perfect. Thanks, Mike. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the process. What do financial firms look at when qualifying hemp businesses? What is the typical timing and steps to secure financing? And what are some of the most common mistakes you see people making in this process? Mike, do you want to start us off again?
Yeah, so one of the things we look at is really, for established businesses, we want to look at the revenue and the burn rate, making sure that the company has an understand. Again, for what we do at Sweet Leaf, we don't want to collect equipment. Some lenders out there don't mind getting used equipment back. They make more money. That's not our model. We want you to succeed and come back and finance additional equipment. So we do want to talk about your revenue and burn rates. We'll look at POs for established businesses. And for those that are startups, we want to look at the health of the business, your pro forma, and things of that nature, but also look at the strength of your personal guarantors. If you have another company who wants to guarantee it. So we'll look at things of that nature when we're looking at financing your business. As far as the timing goes, it's usually 14 to 28 days. It's really contingent, basically, on how quickly you can get us the documents that we request. Documents can be things such as your financials, personal information, things of that nature. We run a background check as well as a credit check on the individuals, the personal guarantors. And it can take some time. As I mentioned, $150,000 to $4 million can be larger than most home loans. So with that in mind, we conduct very similar underwriting to a home loan. So the most common mistakes that I see people making, some of it's not necessarily in our process because I'll talk them through the challenges that can come up in our process. But a few things that I see prior to people arriving or coming to me for financing are, they may overestimate their income or pro forma. Sure, that's something that Alex can talk to as far as pricing goes. They're not managing their working capital, so they may be in a panic. And unfortunately, if they need money in the next week, that may not be something I can meet, but I'll work with them on that. Selecting non-traditional equipment for financing. Not that we haven't done it and won't do it, but I do get several calls with, and I'll call it Frankenstein equipment. And that is that many people in this industry have worked in other industries where they know brilliant people that may be mechanically inclined or mechanical engineers and welders that can make equipment that can meet some of the challenges or their needs. The problem with that is when we look at financing it, we're looking at several things such as delivery times, service, warranties, and spare parts. And the Frankenstein equipment may or may not have those individuals there to maintain your equipment throughout the lease term, as well as support you in your health and your growth. So that's something we consider. Another one that is non-traditional in some ways is overseas equipment. You'll see that there are some fairly aggressive companies overseas that will offer very high discounts. But again, it really comes down to delivery time, service, warranties, and spare parts. And that can be a challenge. No, I'm not saying we won't finance that, but typically in those cases, we will do a sale back once the equipment is operational and you're generating some revenue. I say this only because I've seen it more often than not, that those businesses are not operational, that have gotten some of the what I would call more cost-effective equipment. In some cases, I'm going to be honest, it's cheaper, and they haven't gotten it operational, so it can be a challenge to get out of that hole. So just to be upfront, if you haven't secured financing or secured the equipment yet, those are some considerations that you need to think about.
Great. Tim
Totally
or Alex,
separate note, Michael, I saw something today about cargo container ships are backed up almost 6 months from when it should be arriving. So what would be a 6-week sea voyage is now a 6-month and 6-week voyage.
Yeah, and that can be debilitating to a business.
That kills you, man. You're dead in the water before it even starts. If you think it's going to get there and, it'll be here just in time for harvest, and then you get it by, next May.
Right, and that's why I was mentioning earlier, no matter what your business model looks like, remember just that simple fact: control the controllables, right? And being aware of those nuances and those variables are mission critical, and then retesting those variables every month, every few weeks, because as we know, guys and gals, that those can be extended pretty quickly depending upon geopolitical challenges and obviously with the current challenge of COVID-19. So great point, Alex.
Kind of on the same note, but a little bit different and on the realm is, we've seen guys that are paying a premium to what would be considered the benchmark of the index price, just because they know what they're getting on the other side is going to be a consistent product from a consistent person every single time. And they know that they're paying, above market. And then they know that there's, a lot of deals out there, and there's a lot of other guys that would be willing to go way below market just to even make something back. But, some of the guys that are making a custom formulation, let's say, or a tincture, exactly what you're going to get every single time. And they kind of pay for that, comfort of supply, of comfort of knowing. And that's
Yeah.
kind of the same
Yeah.
thing we're talking about there. It's kind of controlling the controllable. It's similar situation to buying machinery in the US here that may be a little bit more expensive, but it's going to get here on time.
And I think quality, I come from the food and beverage background, and quality and reproducibility, to Alex's point, is key for your customers. I mean, people are educating themselves more and more every day. And so I think that is going to be a key feature. As I work with laboratories that are being established throughout the US, their business is going up, and hopefully it continues to go up because people are concerned about quality and the product that they're delivering for public consumption. So I think that's
100%. You can't build a brand where, every single time you get it, it's a little bit different.
No, unless you have a chalkboard, you just erase it and call it a new beer. But I don't think that's true for what we're talking about.
Mambo number 5 this time.
Right.
Awesome. So let's move on here. So let's talk about, why is it harder to find financing in the hemp and cannabis industry? What are the expectations and challenges I should anticipate? I know we probably touched on some of these, but anything to add, Michael?
Again, it's just a bit riskier. It's a startup industry that's innovative. I like the people that are in the industry because they think differently. They think about new things. They approach it differently. So coming out of corporate America, it excites me every day.
Mm-hmm.
But from a financing standpoint, the fundamentals still do apply. So there are less people in it providing the financing. Some of them that were in cannabis financing were also in things like restaurants and hotels, which have taken a very big hit during COVID. So overall, it's just getting more challenging to find that financing in general, not just within cannabis space, just in general when it comes to capital financing could be a challenge. So it's definitely, we're seeing that where we're at now. I think we've touched on a lot of the expectation and challenges they should anticipate. I think just planning ahead, having the conversation as soon as you can with people that you trust, whether, things that when I talk to a customer, it's confidential. I don't pass things on to vendors without their permission, things of that nature. But I'm not a consultant, I just provide financing, but I will share some of my experiences, or if I can put people in touch with other customers that we have that I know are open to having conversations, or may be able to support them, especially vendors that we work with, such as IEC, I'm more than happy to do that.
Just piggybacking on that, why is it harder to find financing? I mean, a big thing for me is that, although the cat's out of the bag in terms of the farm bill, and I don't think we're going to be able to reel everything back and say, okay, never mind, we're not doing hemp at all. I do think you see these states where they're starting to do local legislation that's hampering things. So let's say, you made a big investment in a smokable flower company in Louisiana, and now they just come down with this huge ban there. And, there's a lot of changing tides, I guess you could say, in terms of the legislative landscape that may keep an investor holding onto his pocketbook a little bit tighter than before.
Alex, you've nailed it. And that's, that's a challenge that we listen to. We provide financing in Canada as well as the US, so the approaches are a little different. In fact, CBD and hemp in Canada is a little more secure in many ways and controlled differently in Canada. But you're absolutely right. The problem is the local impacts or the stories that come out that may be negative with a farmer that lost their crop. It could be for regulatory purposes, or it can be from a hailstorm. Are definitely, putting people that provide financing in a corner to make some tough decisions on where they're willing to and how they're willing to finance.
And that's on a state basis too. So you see people now even on town basis where the town residents are up in arms because of the smell or something or whatever it may be. And you never know what kind of situation you get yourself into with such a tricky cousin to everything else that's going on.
Right. The other thing, Jen, I wanted to mention is that we've been talking a fair amount relative to private funding and financing. One of the areas that have been really helpful, at least from some of our clients, has been tapping into and understanding the state related grants and those types of vehicles that could be available at the state level, which primarily we've seen available through the Departments of Economic Development. They take many different forms and shapes, but they could be dollars available through like enterprise funds, innovation funds for new technologies, low interest type of loans. But remember, no matter what vehicle they're put in, it's similar to what Mike and company do. as well as with the banks. There are thresholds for companies to perform, and they are performance-based. So there's no literally free dollars available. Nonetheless, another pool that our listeners can tap into are those state-level programs, Jen, that could offer an additional avenue for them to secure some finance.
Yeah, exactly, Tim. All right, so let's talk about making money. Alex, what makes up the commodity pricing? Where can we forecast prices going to end in 2020? And will we see a rise or more of a slide in prices? And where do you see the trends going both domestically and internationally?
Okay, yeah, let's unpack those one by one. So what makes up our commodity pricing? So essentially we release on a monthly basis, and we'd like to start doing this on a bi-weekly and even a daily if we get to there, but I don't think this market's quite there yet. We're still in our infancy. You mentioned crawl, walk, run. I don't even think we're crawling yet. We're a baby on our back still. But essentially, what makes up our commodity prices is, I touched on this a little bit earlier, but we have 9 regional indexes or benchmarks that essentially dictate, what's been going on for the previous month in that area. So how we determine that is IOSCO it's the International Organization of Securities. So essentially it's a certain way, but in layman's terms, it's a weighted average. And the weighted average basically weights the actual trades that go down on the platform, then the bids and offers that could be transacted upon, but that maybe they don't get picked up for some reason or other, or they get countered. And then the last one would be an assessment form, or I'm talking to someone, what did they do off platform? But from those, that third one in the assessment platform, those are going to be only guys that we vetted to be on the platform itself. So those are going to be actual big time players, not your LinkedIn guys saying that this is the price down kind of thing, or it's vetted prices, and it's not just kind of every Tom, Dick, Harry walking in off the street. And I mean, to be honest, if I was a farmer, I would try to go in here and into our system and submit that I sold $4 a point 20 times to try to rise the price up in my area that may be at 90 cents a point, for example. So, we do try to vet out the prices and throwing out some outliers and stuff like that, and try to be fair stewards to the market, like as you were saying earlier, Tim. Okay, the next one. Where can we forecast prices going to end in 2020? Will we see a rise or more of a slide in prices? This one is a little hard to tell. I mean, if I could look into the crystal ball and tell, I probably wouldn't be on this podcast with you guys right now. I'd be in Vegas, counting cards or something like that. But I do think we're in for another tough year, another tough harvest. I said earlier that low prices cure for low prices. I don't think we're there to that point this year. I do think some of the sexy money, so will you have it, is still kind of flowing into the industry. You do have new states coming online, Texas, Florida, for example. Those are large states, large consumer states as well, but large states, that they have some farmers that want to get in on the action as well. I do think you're going to see an oversupply. And I also think, parallel to the CBD market is also the CBG market, which kind of functions on its a little bit of a parallel. Kind of funnily enough to say, last year CBD prices for clones and seeds were exactly equivalent to what they are for CBG prices for clones and seeds. So it may be something to kind of look at as we go into harvest of, how much are we going to fall? Because last year around this time, I believe we were almost at like $3.80 a point. So if you have a 10%, $38 a pound for biomass, and we are nowhere near that point right now. So it'd be similar to kind of see if we're going to have a similar fall in that sense, or if we're going to be able to kind of prop up the market and sustain itself. I know things have been starting to get active right now just because we are so far away from harvest last year. So now you're really kind of scraping the bucket, looking, kicking some buckets around, looking for what else is out there that's good product. But I do also think that there's going to be a bifurcation between the two markets of what's just got harvested and is good product, and this has been sitting in the barn for one entire calendar year. What can you do with it? And I do think those are going to kind of work as two different markets almost. What do you guys think? Any input on the prices?
Yeah, I think you make some very wise and really just foundational components to your to your perspectives. And there's a fair amount of uncertainty and unpredictability, but with the current amount of, quote, biomass that has not been moved or processed, dried, extracted, we don't see that as even potentially even making it to market. It might not even have that value that you'd mentioned in terms of bifurcation, Alex. So we don't know what that current biomass looks like from a potency perspective in the field, but every day goes by, we see a degradation of its value. So I wouldn't be betting much about that current biomass and its value, more so towards a bifurcation of what you're saying in terms of that future harvest in 2019 here in a few months.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm finding that, customers that we're talking to, for the most part, are having pretty honest internal conversations with themselves and within their own organization, which is encouraging. It doesn't make it any easier on themselves or working with them, but I think some of them, they're realizing the fact it used to be a year ago, they would definitely overstate pricing. We do our own research. In fact, that's some of the questions we have for a customer, just to see if they're doing their research as well. Again, I want them to be successful. So don't, always be targeting the high price. Can you survive? Does your business model work if pricing drops by 20%, 30%, or 60%? So I think those are questions that we will ask depending on what kind of equipment and what part of the industry they're in.
Michael, that's really funny you say that, because I remember, anecdotally speaking to someone about a year and a half ago, right after the Farm Bill, essentially, and this was at a happy hour, so he was a little more extra chatty than usual. One could expect at a happy hour, and was telling me, we have no problem at all. We have this big facility, we can make isolate, and we can sell isolate as low as 2,000 a kilo or something like that, and still be able to. And right now, isolate prices are below 1,000, so that just kind of gives you an idea of where prices have been, and that was in the days of $9,000, $10,000 a kilo for CBD isolate. So things do change, and it kind of goes back to and to your realm, I guess you could say, in the capital world, is investors want to know, is the price going up, is the price going down, are we going to have a fallout? I don't think we're going to have a fallout. There's certain levels where I don't think we're going to go below, and for me, if I had to look into a crystal ball for biomass, at least it would be probably 40 cents per point. Crude, something around $125 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And the distillates, it's hard to tell what miners are in there and stuff like that. But isolate, probably around 1,000 is going to be you're starting to near even break even points, unless you have a really large scale facility, and even then you're not putting much towards the bottom line.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thanks, guys. Let's keep looking ahead a little bit more here. What is the current state level of hemp drying capacity in the U.S.? Tim, do you want to start with that question?
Sure. The projected number of acres this year that could be planted that are licensed that are about 450,000 acres. So it's although it's a decrease in the number of total acres, you have an increase in number of licensees, which is interesting in terms of that dynamic. Nonetheless, that equates to, at a conservative estimate, between 1.5 to 3.0 billion wet pounds of hemp to dry. And when you just make that a simple equation, is there enough drying capacity to meet that demand at 100%? There's not. We do know that it's not going to reach 100% relative to product that will need to be dried. There's a lot of variables. It makes some challenging harvest, right? Mother Nature is always one of those keys. Nonetheless, we see some fragmentation beginning to solidify towards more of those processing centers, Jen, where regards to we're having larger processing centers being developed in terms of a vertically integrated marketplace, where they're starting to really look towards larger drying versus individual farmers drying, more of those capacity dryers from a business model that kind of lends itself towards like that toll drying concept, where you're able to truck in particular loads of hemp to a centralized drying facility geographically. So we see that evolving, but as of today, is there enough drying capacity? No. And two, with the new entries of the warmer climates such as Florida and Texas, where there's high humidity, that's a new dynamic for us, right? and having more processing centers there is going to be mission critical for all concerned.
Yeah, definitely. Michael or Alex, anything to add there?
I am not a dryer man. I would say consult him if you need some. He definitely won't burn it.
No, I don't have anything specifically to dry there besides just from a supply chain standpoint. I think Alex kind of referenced it before, and the cost when you look at the distance to travel and, you know, considering all those things. I think that's why companies like IEC can be so strategic in where they're located and where the drying operations are located, and just looking at your complete supply chain. You know, that's just from my previous experience in food and beverage beyond drying.
Excellent. So Tim, what is your perspective on where the industry is headed in the next 12, 24, 36 months?
I think you've seen the trend. I think Alex hit it on it earlier. You're moving away from that sexy money to more of the really defined, determined, and granularized dollar investments, which is this natural evolution of an industry. I think the other thing we're going to see is more actualization of guidance and regulations relative to USDA and FDA, not necessarily for those prescription-based products solely, but more for the consumer and over-the-counter use. I think we're going to really begin to see more traction in 2021 and beyond with regards to actualization of some of those regulations and guidance. And again, regulation and guidance are two different areas for two different product channels. I also think we're going to see more well-capitalized plans through Mike Glade and Sweetleaf Capital versus what I call the one-offs. Two, I think you'll see more co-op models where, and again, this is a healthy perspective in that don't go it alone, right? Is kind of the mantra. So what does that mean? It means working with your local growers and farmers to, spread the risk, make the collaborative investment to buy that equipment, right? To ensure that you have the trucking, to ensure you have the extractor relationships, the processing relationships. So I think you'll see more of the co-op model emerging. I think it'll be more well-capitalized, larger entities. And I think you'll also see that vertical integration, where it's kind of like the virtual vertical integration. I think you're actually going to see it, meaning that entities coming to marketplace where they have the really sophisticated harvesting equipment, all the way from the headers, like the Inceptor with Farmex, to the hammer mills, to the grinders with CME, to the dryers, to the classification systems, all underneath one roof. Where if you're able to control that environment, I think you have more consistent outcomes, and you can squeeze out profit margins more realistically, I think. And I think you're going to see all those within the next 12 to 24 months and come to a little bit more of a realization.
Great, thanks, Tim.
I honestly think in the next 12, 24, 36 months, you will see, this is kind of switching gears a little bit from the drying side at least, but you're going to see an influx in guys that are growing for herd or for the fiber or for hemp seed oil for an animal feed, etc. Those kinds of things, these alternative uses.
Yeah.
If I was a farmer that, let's say I had a family farm that had been struggling a little bit, and hemp was kind of my saving grace that, was going to make me all this money, $50,000 an acre, etc. And then it didn't this year, I would still probably maybe explore a couple of other avenues. However, I don't think the R&D is built out for, companies that are actually going to purchase this from, I think you're going to have a lot of hemp in the field grown for fiber, grown for hemp seed oil cake that is going to struggle to find a buyer. But is that going to be a tail wagging the dog kind of thing where that's going to kind of promote these industries to kind of, hey, let's get our shit together. We have a very admirable and very, accessible, easily accessible and cheap input here that can compete with cottonized textiles, that can compete, with the bio plastics and et cetera, in terms of price, at least. And if the situation's so dire, then I do think that you're going to see more and more people go from, I did notice that last year in the FSA documents, 77% of hemp grown in the U.S. was for cannabinoid extraction, purely for extraction purposes, for smokable flower. I think you're going to probably see a little bit more of a tipping of the scales a little bit and start to see more of those herd guys.
Well, and I, I personally hope that's true. I've been in the sustainability world myself for a number of years, so I hope that's true, Alex. But I will also say in the last few years, as far as what we've been financing, we haven't been approached by many people like that. So I'm hoping we do see a change moving forward. We had a textile facility we financed a number of years ago, and we were told by some of the shirt manufacturers that they would take as many hemp shirts, t-shirts as we could make, because they thought they could sell them very quickly. They were in high demand. But despite that being said, it still just wasn't enough to get that business really rolling with any momentum. But I think moving forward, the benefits, the engineering side of hemp products is going to come out. And I think there will be some innovative leaders within the farming community and beyond that come out and support those activities. So I hope that that's something we get approached about more and more. But right now, I'm still not getting approached very much on alternative uses, which should probably be some of the primary uses for hemp.
I think all it takes is one. You get a Coca-Cola, or you get, Levi Strauss has always been, lauded as this champion, but I don't know if they're quite the one that's going to be kind of the tipping point that says, okay, if Gap's doing it, Old Navy's going to look over and say, okay, let's take a look at this. This might make some sense here. Or if it's in the plastics community or for insulation for homes, etc. I think some of these, which have long been considered, hippie kind of things, now that they're going to come into fruition and to actually, break some ice into the industrial world and say, hey, we're here to stay.
I hope so. I think you're right.
Yeah, hopefully. Definitely. Good. We have one question left. If any of you guys have any questions that you've been thinking of, feel free to drop them in there, because we'll be getting to a live Q&A in just a moment. But let's talk about this question. What are the tipping points you see to those changes in the industry? Tim, you want to start with that one?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in, and maybe it's because of my history in the pharma and molecular diagnostics world, is the data. And what I mean by that, relative to data, is the consumer-based and or clinical data that's currently occurring, whether at the research level with universities in the genetic space, in terms of predictability outcomes, to controlled clinical trial, right? With regards to addressing, sleep-related conditions, pain-related conditions. There's some pretty robust, at least study designs that I've seen that are currently being filled. And so I think that those data points will be more actualized in 2021 and beyond. And I think that is going to tip the scales on the consumer-based side, not necessarily in the industrial side. I'm speaking more consumer-based. I think that will tip the scale towards higher demand. Right now, it's gone from, I think, the consumer incentive. They hear about it from their friend. But I think in 2021, you'll actually have a chance to read a study and some clinical results and outcomes that demonstrates and support that and creates more predictability, Jen, with regards to utilization of these products. So I think the data is the key.
Yeah, definitely. Alex, Michael, anything to add there?
Yeah, happy to chime in. A big tipping point for me, I think, would be time. We're still, the farm bill is very much still in the rearview mirror. It's not, that far away, and I still think our industry is rife with the kind of ex-black market kind of people that they give it a bad name sometimes. And I think the more and more time that we get away from that, the more and more time, good business people that practice good practices will come in, and you'll start to see, even then, just, anecdotally here, whenever you see a transaction on PanXChange, most of the time the payment term is going to be cash in advance. It has to be, because you don't know what you're going to get on the other side, or an escrow, for example. Whereas, I'm familiar with commodities where, you get a net 15 or a net 30 pay date on it, and you know what you're going to get. If there's a claim, let's say, your product wasn't as advertised, you make a claim, and, that's how good companies do business and transact together. And right now it's so much, I'm not going to show you mine until you show me yours kind of thing, and a lot of secrecy. And I think the further we get away from that, the better. So time is kind of my tipping point. Just got to kind of wait it out.
Yeah, and to kind of both what Tim and Alex said, build on that a little, but not much, is quality products, and having the understanding of what you're getting. And then secondly would be supply demand. when you look at, I was raised in there when we actually still had to learn the metric system, and then it went away. But you look at how much the normal dose, let's say, is 10 milligrams of CBD, and then you look at how much is provided in a crop of 1,000 acres to cover that demand. It can be a challenge, and that's where quality. I think you're going to see alignment between quality and supply demand, and then those that are putting in the extra time, bring the expertise, put in the extra effort, are going to be rewarded as being leaders within the industry and managing through some of the challenges that we may see from a supply demand standpoint.
And actually putting as much as advertised on the bottle, and not. I remember there's a few studies that came out that in a 100 milligram tincture, only 64 milligrams of actual CBD was in it and stuff. And that's going to be the quickest way to alienate a new population, like my mom or my grandmother, who doesn't know what the hell this stuff is. But when I give it to her and she says it doesn't work, well, yeah, there's only 10% of the advertised value in there. So
exactly, I think that's important.
Great point. Good. Well, any last thoughts on this slide, guys? Otherwise, we'll move on to some questions.
I think we did get a Q&A here, so.
Awesome. All right, so starting with the first question here. For insurance purposes, you need to pre-sell your product. How can you find potential buyers as a first-time grower? Do any first-time growers qualify for insurance?
I'm happy to take this one since I mentioned it earlier, and by no means do I have an insurance license, do I know anything about insurance, etc. But I would say it would be helpful to know kind of where you are in the region, or in the nation rather, to kind of point you out. I'm happy to, off the call here, if you get my contact information, maybe put you in touch with a few people in the area that may be on the tolling or processing side. But for a first year grower without any, proof in the pudding from last year, it's going to be very difficult to find someone that's going to pay cash, ahead of time for your product in order to qualify for that insurance. There are ways to do it via tolling splits, etc., as long as the person that's doing the tolling for you takes ownership of the product when they're doing that. But I'm happy to talk about this with you at another time, and maybe even bring in a few other guys on our team that are more of the insurance specialists, I guess you could say.
Perfect. Thanks, Alex. All right. Next question we have here is, what do you recommend we do with the biomass from 2019, knowing a wave of fresh product is coming in a few months? Is there any way to get any value out of the old biomass?
Interesting question. I think it's a pretty universal question. The first thing is to see what the value of that biomass is. And the only way to do that is you have to process that hemp. You have to dry it. You have to stabilize it. So be fair to yourself and to be fair to the customers you're trying to serve by taking that biomass, getting it processed by whatever means you like to, complete that task, and then have a really reputable, licensed lab do the COA and do it on several different samples within a particular lot of biomass to ensure you have consistency of product from bale to bale. But really do yourself a really good service. Don't guess. Be really deliberate. Be very, very granular. Get it dried and get it tested by reputable firms.
Yeah, piggybacking on that, Tim, is, after you dry it and you process it, I definitely would say to converting it into a crude oil, although they may cost money and a toll or a split, you are able to save that product, and it degrades the cannabinoids at a lower rate, much lower rate than biomass. If you still have biomass in a barn in the summertime, let's say it's a wet summer, I'm from Tampa, Florida, it rains every single day. I mean, you may have some trouble with keeping that from molding or keeping that from, just really degrading. Whereas you can store crude oil in a much more smaller area, but also in a much more controlled area. Kind of as a wild shot, something we wrote about in our last newsletter, Shauna, I saw that you asked the question about getting any value out of the old biomass. I have seen that there are people experimenting with animal feed as a biomass, because there are still residual proteins and lignans and stuff like that in the biomass. It really depends on the nutritionist of the animal that you're going to feed it to, and also the extraction methods, if it's hexane or if it's ethanol. All these little things make a huge difference for a nutritionist. So I would say that may be something if you live in a rural area and you have someone, that has a huge deer plot or cattle plot or something like that, maybe approach a nutritionist there and let them know you do have a bunch of biomass and it may be worth something. It's better than nothing. So.
Yeah, definitely.
And I would just add, always you need to plan ahead early. And I know everyone that's in this business is just busy every day, especially farmers are just constantly on the go.
Mm-hmm.
But the key is we get calls for rescues where they don't know what to do with the product. They don't have dryers and what have you. The key is whether you're dealing with existing product or next year's product, you just have to move ahead. You have to establish those relationships to get route to market. You have to, look at the complete supply chain and the complete process to get your product in the form that you need to get it into and plan around and put in the detail. Because this is more than a handshake business anymore.
Yeah.
You really, it's going to take a lot of hard work, but I wouldn't give up on 2019 biomass for sure. I think to your point, getting the COAs, trying it and moving forward to get an idea of what you have.
Yeah.
Yeah, great points. All right, and then this will probably be our last question. If you have any more, feel free to drop them in there. This is our last one for now, though. Sean asks, you mentioned grant funding. How can I get more info on that?
Well, the first place I would go to is I would make 2 phone calls. One is to your state Department of Agriculture to actually identify who in that institution is in regards to agricultural and hemp. 2, every state has a Department of Economic Development. So that's where I would start. And some of the states have really robust departments of economic development that are supported by legislation from the legislators to represent their constituents to bring in money and bring in new businesses, Jen and company. So there are really defined programs, but also be very mindful that there are thresholds that need to be met through these 2 initiatives and areas of focus, be it Department of Agriculture or State Department of Economic Development. Those are the 2 that I would primarily focus in on the gate.
Perfect. Thanks, Tim. All right, well, we'll end with that one. Alex, Mike, and Tim, thank you guys so much for joining us today. I know I learned a lot of new info here. I'm sure all of our attendees did as well. So you will, if you didn't get to write down Alex, Mike, or Tim's email addresses, feel free to do that. Otherwise, their contact info will come in a follow-up email along with the recording of this webinar. So be sure to like or share today's episode on YouTube or subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't already. We've got a lot of good content on there, so be sure to check it out. And thank you guys so much for joining us throughout this whole series. Couldn't have done it without you guys. We've had so many great questions. I hope you found this series helpful. Also, just be sure to check out our new and improved website. It's iec-thermo.com, and reach out to us if you have any questions. Alex, Michael, and Tim, any last words?
Be deliberate, don't dream, control the controllables, and remember, just take one day at a time and things will work out. Just stay focused.
Hope is not a strategy.
Yes.
No, thank you, everyone. Good luck, and please reach out if we can chat. More than happy to talk to you about your needs and your opportunities.
Great.
Cool.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Michael, we got to get out to the lake sometime, man.
I agree. I agree.
Talk to you guys soon.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care.